completing my PhD, this was probably stuff from the Biennale and from other exhibitions I've done in the States. I very much work with components, and this was using 3-axis water jet cutting. And this was a piece of my work from when I did my PhD. And this is all those dots you see are partial piercings. So the controlled depth piercing of the glass to a set depth. And one crack, it's the end of the piece. So I had to work with understanding the annealing cycle and the properties of the material to enable me to be able to do that controlled depth piercing. And this is a piece I still have. I think for me, it's my favourite piece that I have, which I think demonstrates the research that I did when I was at Sunderland. Because Sunderland I was fortunate, they gave me a water jet machine to work on. So it was the only place probably in the world that had a machine for me to work on directly. And that has then continued with other people doing PhD research in the same field, but in different guises. But it's kind of nice. I suppose I was a bit of a pioneer of using this technology. And now in the curriculum, it's used in glass education, and the use of technology is used more, etc., etc. So, you know, from that and teaching and everything else, in 2012, I wrote a book on new technologies in glass, where I talk about lots of other people applying the technology to their practice. And I'm very much a person who has worked with other artists and other people able to produce work, but I'm also very interested in collaboration. So all the way through my PhD and through my practice, even when I was doing stained glass, I've helped others. And I think I've always acted as a facilitator, whether it's paid, unpaid. You know, I get lots of people asking for advice and about how to use it, you know, water jet, or how to do projects. So it's just part of, I suppose it's part of who I am, that I kind of give a lot of information away. And I think that's also part of what you do with a PhD. You disseminate and you give that information quite freely. And also, I think that's a role that has to be played when you're in academia, which I do now. So the one thing I'd say about writing a book, though, for Bloomsbury is it curtails artistic practice, because when you start writing about it, you're not doing it. And the more you write about it, the less you do it. So I found that kind of sort of a bit stifling, but since then it's evolved and moved on. So in 2015, I was invited by John Charman to participate in Silicon Valley. And this was a show that was going to consist of 8 other people showing work that is defined by technology. And he came across my work and some work of others through the book. And so he knew of my work, and then he started finding other people's work. And this is a slide of kind of how I start out when I'm using part of the processes. So when I work now using SolidWorks, and what you see on the screen is a bit of water jet programming from one project, and you see some 3D printing, and you see SolidWorks. So you see the kind of the programming side. Then, and here's another image of taking like writing and sort of drawing and then applying it and programming it so that it can cut and become a successful piece when it goes into glass. So all those green lines are linking and connecting into the different holes and working with the positive, negative of the shapes. I was kind of, with this one, it was very much something that started a couple of years ago, where when you travel and do some residencies or you get on the ward, you can turn up with a company, but you can't take stuff with you. And the only thing you can really take is a pen. So I started writing about what I was doing on the machine. And so the machine started cutting what it was learning about itself. So whatever I wrote in the diary or whatever I wrote down of what I'd learnt about the process on that day, I'd then use the next day in terms of what I was going to do. And so handwriting seemed the most natural thing to look at. And so this is just like showing you some of that. And that was working with OMAX in Seattle. And for my practice and what I do now, I work with industry, not only in the UK, but in the States, to enable me to produce the work. I no longer have a water jet machine that I have access to. So I work with industries and people like OMAX to enable me to develop my ideas, but also to kind of explore their machines and kind of feed back to them how they're used in more creative circumstances. So this is the programming and drawing. And then this is a small portable machine, and which I have worked on. It's a very hands-on. So when I work on machines, I work directly on them. I don't necessarily always work, hand it over to a programmer. I kind of work with them, and I also do it myself. But the work comes out through exploring the parameters of the machine and testing the material. So that the circular disc on the side, the spiral, is probably less than the millimeter distance. It's a small micro water jet setup. And what I do is when I go anywhere, I kind of like to find out the parameters. So I play around with spirals and lines and seeing how delicate and fine I can get them, and seeing how I can maintain the structure of the material. And with this, as it was cutting, it was vibrating. It was a bit like a sound system. You know, when you hear a speaker and it vibrates. With that in the water, it kind of, I had to be careful because it could cause the glass to break itself just by the vibration of the water in the bed. So I have to kind of work with new setups, the height of the water, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to lay it out, the depth, thickness, lots of things that aren't usually the standard way of cutting with these sort of machines. So I kind of go against the grain in some instances because I know what will be successful and what won't. But from that, I would then sort of explore. So when we talk about the handwriting, these are, the top ones are just drawings of capturing my mother's handwriting, who passed away a number of years ago. And then doing the programming that you saw in the previous slides, and then putting it into some of these little glass discs. And at the bottom, you can see the love, that is, under a millimeter in thickness. And I've managed to maintain the integrity of my mum's handwriting, but also the structure of the glass. So it kind of gives you an insight of what I'm trying to achieve. Again, printing. So when I don't have a water jet machine, I kind of started using 3D printers. So, and I've just had one arrive today for me to put in the studio, which I'm excited about. So this is an image of designing a small lid to go onto a form. And on the right hand side is actually 7 stacked component parts that I'm going to then cast, so put into plaster. So I use traditional mold making techniques, but what I've done is just stack them to get an idea of what they look like, but not necessarily as accurate, because the plain discs around where they're slotted into are actually the reservoirs for which the glass will sit. So if I turn that picture upside down, it would be how I would cast the glass. So I'm going to move to that. So here you see the process of me printing and mold making. So setting things up so that they can be cast. And this is done in my little studio in the back garden. So when I got asked to do this show, I kind of saw it as a great opportunity to move into 2 ways, from moving away from 3-axis water jet into 5-axis, but also 3D printing, because I wanted to see how I could then use the waste of the water jet material and apply it to the 3D printed form, so I could make my work more sustainable, so I wasn't wasting too much glass, because actually when you cut glass, you have a lot of stuff left over, and that seems ridiculous, and especially in the current climate, it's kind of good to have a more sustainable and utilize your glass in a more effective way. So this is just using foam board to make my dams and pins, and you know, I adore gaffer tape because it holds everything together. It can, you know, but we all have our strange little things that we seem to like and dislike. But this is just a simple setup that I found was effective and productive. And again, this is the end result. So this is on the left, the mold, but once the PLA has been burnt out, and on the right are the components that are the pieces that are going to make up the part. So it enabled me over the year to kind of explore and develop ideas. The ideas always come from my surroundings. So I was fortunate to spend 2 years in an aerospace company, and I've always loved machines and engineering. So I find shapes and forms are developed from what I see daily, and they come from what surrounds me rather than actually going on a theme. I suppose my theme's engineering and tech and digital, but it's, and components. I've always seemed to make component parts. But the blue ideally initially was going to be the waste of the clear, which I'm going to show you in a minute, but I had huge compatibility issues. So for the time I decided to take another colour, but the principle of using the printing is to 5-axis cut one form and then use the waste of that to apply in the 3D printing. So I'm utilising the glass and the material. So this is the work for Silica Valley. I made 3 new pieces, and then I drew upon some other pieces that kind of were earlier works, but they kind of link into what you've just been seeing. So this is mechanics, and this is cast glass. It's 6 component pieces. So the grey that runs in between is actually just the shadow of a layer of white glass that sits in between 2 layers of clear. So I kind of play around with that, the subtleties of the glass and the qualities of the glass, but at the same time, they create their own light and their own effects. And so it's kind of has a feeling to me like it's woven. And then in between each of those layers are some glass discs. Again, this is another piece. This is called Flight, and this is float glass cut. There's about 20 pieces, and they're stacked with a grey-black interlayer in between. And by playing with the machine and playing with the angles of cut, I'm able to get this effect. But also, as you look down, if you look in the shadow of that first image, the form gets smaller and smaller and the fins get bigger as it goes down the form. So when you look inside it, it becomes like a vessel form internally, but it's a cylinder on the outside. So I like playing with that illusion of what's happening. So you get drawn in to look to a piece. And I find a lot of people get kind of drawn in to look. I like people to kind of, yeah, I think I've always made work that make people question and look into how things are done, you know, that subtlety of illusion and light and how it plays. I've always, and I think that comes from my architectural glass background and training. And then another piece, this is the 3, so the last 2 pieces of 5-axis cut. This piece is actually 3D printed. And so this is taking the same forms, but when you don't have a water jet machine, I go to printing. So I've kind of used the digital and the industrial technology, and I define the 2 quite separately. I think when we talk about digital, there's a multitude of things that are digital, but I think when you use such machines like milling machines or 5-axis and water jet machines, they're industrial technology, they're industrial machines. And so I see them in a slightly different light because they have a different purpose. Digital could be using Illustrator to make a drawing, like the drawings of the medals. They can, digital can be used to make a film or a video. Industrial technology and industrial engagement is slightly different. And what I'm most interested in is those discussions I have with the guys on the machine and the programmers, and the interaction and the feedback and the two-way conversations that happen, that what I do often informs what they do and vice versa. So how they might program. So when we were doing the previous things, these pieces, how the guy at Aquajet would program was different to how I would program. And when he saw how I would program, he preferred it. But it's only because I knew the material and the glass and how it would work. And so we kind of have, it's like a lovely symbiotic relationship. So not only I'm sustainable in practice in terms of materials, I try to be sustainable in my practice in terms of collaboration. And in turn, when I work with industry, I often will write a paper alongside that benefits them as well as me. And so it's always, I'm always looking at the differences in how we communicate and how we can move the technology forward, not only for myself, but also for the industry. And so I work with the water jet industry as much as I can when I can. But, you know, it's always dependent on if I'm working towards an exhibition or not. I don't necessarily make work just for the sake of it. With the printing stuff, I can do a bit more, but when I work with the 5-axis and the costs incurred of using such machinery, you have to really kind of consider when you use and how you use. But for Silica Valley, these went down very well and well received, but sadly, you know, COVID hit. And so a year's work suddenly is in a box again. Again, this is another piece called Chaos. I initially showed something similar a few years ago at the Biennale, but it was more controlled. And I kind of find on a couple of pieces I do, there's a lot more iterations before I'm comfortable. I find pieces evolve. And so sometimes when I've shown it in one way, I'll show it another way in a different way until I'm kind of satisfied. And I think it sits really well alongside the chitter chatter. That is kind of, I'll show you in a moment, is the third iteration of the piece. But this is all a bit, I think, like my mind at the time, and it's all held by thread. So it's in a circle, and like it's all piled up and distorted into, and every single disc has got sandblasting that has got gibberish over it, and it's all kind of contained, but and all the pins are glass and lamp worked. I'll show a detail. So as you see there, I've kind of put everything under tension so that it's got that, you know, will it break out or not? And I think that's often how we kind of hold ourselves in our minds at this current time, so that it's kind of containment of a form. And this actually travelled to Pittsburgh in one piece, and it didn't arrive broken. I kind of crated it up as you see it, and it arrived in one piece. However, for this one, this had to go in like it looked like I was dealing. It was kind of 300 pieces of glass, well, actually a lot more than 300 discs of glass that had to all be separately packaged and sent in a little box, labelled, and then they were all pinned with black lampwork pins into this frame. And this is the third iteration again. Before I did it on a bigger, but I felt it needed to be in a more confined space. And again, here's a detail. And it's a whole multitude of conversations and discussions, a bit like when you're on Zoom, when, you know, you haven't got the mute button on, you know, when you hear snippets of noise and everything around, you hear something over in one screen, something over in another. And the same as when you're at exhibitions or shows, you hear snippets of conversations happening. And this is all about drawing you in to look for those conversations and those sentences. And what I've done with this piece was a collaboration of anybody who wanted to participate, but also with the engineers, the scientists, those working with me, family, and they've all written. And I've just broken it down into programming. And not selective. I've tried not to be. I've just been haphazard in selecting parts of the conversations. And then what happens is they're all kiln formed and distorted slightly. And then when they're pinned, they hang on a pin so that they can move, so that they can continue to chitter-chatter to one another. So the idea is that if there's a bit of movement in the air, they can move and to draw your eye in, but they can still have those continuing conversations. And I kind of see it a bit like the collaboration I have with industry. It's continual and it's never ending, and it's always moving forward. Some ask me why black glass, like with chaos, why white? I suppose it's the polar opposites, that containment, that kind of nervousness and that tension. And for this show, they sat side by side, and I think it was probably a piece that's probably of its time. And I think with the isolation and everything happening with lockdowns, I think it's been quite a current piece. Here, the final, a couple more slides are showing you an overview of the work actually in Pittsburgh. Happily been able to be there for a couple of days as the show went up, and then and luckily coming back to the UK before proper shutdown. So this is one of the pieces that was on show there, the gender. And the reason I call it gender was Simon Bruntnell photographed the work, and there's pink interlayers. And actually what was interesting when it was being lit, I hadn't a name for it when I started, but the pink seemed to dominate the blue when it was lit. And I don't know why, but word gender came into my mind. So I thought it was apt. So here's a couple of images from the show. So this is the mechanics. This is the works in situ while they were there. So the mechanics, gender, chaos, and chitter chatter. And then some people looking at the pieces. This is the flight piece, people viewing it. And then a final overview of the show. So I think that is it. I've kept it short and sweet.
Brilliant.
Fascinating.
Absolutely excellent.
Yeah.
So that work's coming back to me shortly. It went from, so COVID hit, it shut down within the week. They did do a couple of virtual tours, so that's all on the Pittsburgh Glass Centre website. I sent over about 7 pieces. It then went on some pieces to another gallery, Hawk Galleries in Columbus, Ohio. And now it's due to come back. So sadly, none of it sold there, which is disappointing. So now it's coming back to sit in boxes for a while. I don't know where it's going to go next. But it was a huge investment, I think, even just to get for the year. So because I work with the design, I borrowed the 3D printer over Christmas. So yeah, I borrowed the 3D printer, and from literally 2 days before Christmas right up till just before I had to send the work in February, I was printing every single day and casting every kind of 4 days work to get it to work. And then over the course of 3 months, even though I was invited for a year, I couldn't really knuckle down to it unless it was in the holiday time and fit around. So when I work with the company up in Lancashire, I have to fit around their schedules. So I would drive up, leave at 5 in the morning, drive up and work with them for a day, stay with relatives and then go back. And we had to fit around what other work was on the machines. And then I'd have to come away and leave, and they would do something. So I probably had about 6 days, 8 days of cutting. And then they gave me access to the small micro machine because I can use that myself. But the whole thing is about advancing 3-axis, 5-axis and micro water jet cutting. So some of the stuff on the chitter chatter is using a micro setup. That's an experimental setup that's used by the companies that produce the machines. So I've been really fortunate. I have access to setups that you wouldn't normally have. So in a way, I see it's my role as advancing the use of the technology further. So I still stay ahead of the game with other artists out there. So there's a lot of artists using water jet technology now, but I'm fortunate that I'm able to work directly with industry and be able to work with 5-axis and challenge it a little bit more. So I don't have to kind of, it doesn't always have to be successful, or, you know, when you go to a job shop, they cut something and that's what you get. I can change and play with the parameters a lot more. And I suppose if I could, I must admit, I love a machine. I just love any machines. It's like loving bridges, architecture. I love a bit of steel every so often, you know, and the noise. But I really enjoy the discussions with industry. And I think there's a huge research role in terms of that engagement of how creative practice can engage with manufacturing, and how it could actually, especially post-Brexit, the textual skills required for machining is actually, the creative sector has that. And I think it can inform the other sectors, which hasn't been kind of developed yet. So I think there's scope, but we just have to, you know, I'm still formulating my research plan.
Well done. I have to say, Vanessa,
Mm.
I've never seen anything like it. I hadn't realised, really hadn't realised about the process that you have employed. The gender one, I mean, that's nearly half a metre in length. How many I don't know whether you call them joins, but how many sections?
Well, so when I go on SolidWorks, I make them I've made different sections. So I make the components in either 40mm sections or 50mm sections. And what's interesting, when you work in SolidWorks, sometimes the piece was going to be 8 sections at 50, and suddenly it was going to be huge. It was going to be like 700mm, and then proportionally it didn't look right. And one of the biggest problems when you're working digitally and you're working on a small screen is when you're designing a vessel, you see it as the size of the screen. And then when you put it into a physical object, and that's why I stack them, and when I print them out, I look at them, because suddenly when you bring all the components together, they're too big. And so suddenly you're kind of going from something that's going to have 8 sections, you bring it down to 5, because visually the proportion is correct, rather than actually how it looks on a computer program. And I think what I notice a lot with students is the play of scale is being lost through digital application. And so I'm really aware that I need to make physical objects to really see how it's going to work in real life. But I also just like pushing the boundaries. I suppose I know the work I do. I'm the only person doing this work probably anywhere. I don't know anywhere else in the world who's doing the work I do, but I'm not very good at putting it out there.
How are the parts bonded together? How are the parts bonded together?
I use UV glue. I use a UV glue with an activator, because if I'm using a dark glass, I have to use an activator in the UV. But I bond them. I would love to try and cast them all together in one go, but I think that is me pushing my luck, because I'm not a master of casting. But I think within my practice, I have always been about components. I think even when I look back to when I did my stained glass, and I've done external public artwork, like in Hampshire, I've done work here and around the country with the seating, it's all been component work. And I think that's what fascinates me, is this. And I think that comes from looking at architecture and even with windows, you know, my influences come from, even when you look at a skyscraper, and I'm influenced by just the window shapes, the multiple rectangles that come together, you know, that makes a pattern and a design that I think I just look at it through different eyes. But they're stacked and bonded.
So on the water jets, do you get different size silica, so you can do a coarse cut, and you go down to a very, very fine cut?
Well, there's different But I don't have to worry too much. I use 2 different kind of garnet sizes. So I can use, usually I would use 120 if I was using on flat glass, like for the micro, well, for the cutting of the medals. But for really fine, I'd be using even finer, like 220 mesh. But most commercial ones will have 80. And actually, when I cut the 5-axis, because I knew the machine and I knew it was Omax, I could use the 80 because we could slow the speed down and the parameters of the machine to get the quality of cut required. Because if I cut too quickly on a finer mesh, then I'll have overplay, and then the coarseness, there's a coarseness and in the shape, and it comes rough at the lower base of the part. And I'm interested in the quality of the top of the glass being as good as at the bottom. So I don't want that much deviation. So, you know, so the taper and that kind of equipment. So I suppose part of me is I'm part engineer, part artist. I think I just like, I like the geeky parts.
When you said about the spiral and it was resonating as you was machining it, is it possible you could put a thin sheet of metal underneath that and gone through the 2 so the metal could have supported it and stopped it from resonating?
No, because the metal will have a different vibration rate. So what you do is, I had support material, but instead of having water, so a lot of times when you water jet cut, you bring the water up and you close it.
Yeah.
What you do with glass and things like that, you have to lower the water, but you increase the volume, so it's really, really noisy, the decibel level. But you have to stop that idea of the water being able to splash up and ride up. So the board I use, the honeycomb, is brilliant for that. But I have to use the water level. If you even put the water above the top to reduce the noise, the water pressure could cause it to fracture. And what you notice with the spiral is, actually it's not a circle. Because of the vibration of the glass moving, it becomes quite irregular. So if you look closely on those circles, they're actually not as circular as you would expect, because the glass is vibrating. So of course the glass is vibrating, so it means the nozzle it's becoming more irregular. So if I put that, and you can often visually see that.
I liked the chaos, was it? The
Chaos.
white? Yes.
Yeah.
I thought absolutely wonderful.
The wall piece, well, I had fun. So when I made that, I decided I initially just used pins you can just get from the shop. And then I decided to do a ridiculous, I don't know how many of you went to the Biennale in 2019 and saw my piece, which was like 15,000 lampwork pins on the wall. I decided to, with that project, and then from doing that, I decided that I should lampwork the pins for Chaos and for Chitter Chatter. So I made about 2,000 pins just in case any broke. And I got those spares, and I kind of enjoyed making them, because I then had to learn a new skill of lamp working. And so I kind of keep on adding to my little repertoire. But I always keep coming back to Waterjet and the technology. Sadly, where I am at Chichester, I was promised a machine, but we don't have it. So I now work with a company up in Lancashire where I kind of promoted them for the show. But with COVID, it's kind of like it was a great kind of symbiotic, but because of COVID, you know, I wasn't able to really promote them enough. And because I see it as a joint venture, you know, they've helped me and I'll help them. And you know, even when I go up for them, I take them soup. You know, I'd leave at 5 with a hot thing, because you find when they're engaged, when people are engaged and you care about them, and actually if they're doing stuff for you, like even on the Friday, if I was there on a Friday, I knew that they do their sausage roll run. So I went and did the sausage roll run, and I bought the sausages and bought them lunch because I acknowledged what they were doing for me. And so, you know, and the idea is I was fortunate I didn't have to pay for the work, but if the work sold, then I paid for the work from the sale. So, you know, they've actually done a lot for me, and you know, I'm hoping that I'll be able to reciprocate back. but I'm going to be I'm looking at trying to, with the small portable water jet, trying to do some short courses maybe in the UK that can showcase that machine. And I'm doing one when Pittsburgh is open again next year. It's been delayed. I'm doing a course next year, and OMAX is supplying the small Protomax for me to use with the students so that they can learn to use it, which is great. So it's a nice collaboration there. But I think this, from a academic perspective, my other hat, I see there's huge development, and I've worked with the Crafts Council and the Manufacturing Research Framework to look at how the collaboration and how we link craft skills with manufacturing. And that's one thing that I'm really interested in, that kind of, you know, we seem to. So places like the research manufacturing at Sheffield, they have they've got a jacquard loom, and they're weaving fibre, you know, they're weaving carbon fibre, and they're working with textile artists to understand it, you know, and seeing the strength. You know, if you take old textile and weaving patterns, there's lots of strength in there. Then you put carbon fibre into that, then you've got a new, you know, you've got added strength again. And so it's about that, how the methodologies we employ as creative people, how it can be applied in a different way into a different sector. And I think that's got huge scope.
Is that worth a conversation with somebody like Roger Kneebone, who is pioneering sort of medical skills?
It has. He's been doing the same with the Crafts Council. We've been doing it from different sides. I think I've been doing it a little bit with the Crafts Council. I think I've had the conversation a little bit with him. I think it needs to come actually direct from industry to industry, because I think unless somebody at the top sees it and sees the benefits, you're not going to see it evolve down. I think in surgery, they have got a demand, they have a need for learning certain skills. But currently, I think with Crafts Council, when I talk to them, they're struggling to get that interaction with industry in the right places. And I think, with Sheffield, at AMRC, I've talked to them a couple of times, and they're getting water jets at the moment. They had a water jet machine before, which kind of wasn't very successful. Believe it or not, there's not that much research in water jet cutting in the UK. It's all coming from the companies in the States.
The other person I'm thinking of is Dr. Ian Thompson, who's another Freeman that we've got, pioneering usage of glass in medical circumstances. But he's just started a brand new project, and I haven't got the full details of what he's doing. But he was actually sort of playing around with sort of replacing bones with glass.
Yeah, well, you could do that with the borosilica and lampworking. I can see you happily doing it with the clean and borosilica and lampworking and forms. With water jet, it's got a coarse surface, but with coarse surfaces and like 3D printing, they found when they first initially with 3D printing, you could actually do bricks to make living walls, because it could grow on the surfaces and the structure of the 3D print.
Right.
They could grow, but with glass fragments, you can have the strength to enable you to have growth happening within the bricks. So there's lots of scope, this huge scope. I just think we compartmentalize out a lot of things, and without kind of linking them together. And sometimes when we see it, I was trying to sort of say with the Crafts Council, like collect, you see some beautiful, amazing objects, like somebody's working with electroplating. But there's been an amazing PhD in electroplating done about 20 years ago by Julian Bedette. There's amazing PhD research that's gone on about other processes. And because it's been done artistically, they've got visual references. But all you need is somebody from a company who might electroplate or use it, could probably see it, the skill and knowledge there that could be applied commercially within the manufacturing sector, rather than actually as an artistic use. But it could, you know, I think sometimes when you see things visually artistically, you see the scope of how it can go commercially. But an artist doesn't necessarily see the commercial side, but their knowledge about how they do the process is the thing that they can give to the company. So, you know, I talk about a bit like a kind of like a job shop for creatives, where you could do your own practice for 2 days, but you could keep that informed to help inform industry on the other few days. So a bit like consultation, but what you're doing, it's symbiotic. So you're kind of feeding in. So say you had somebody who needed to know about minute welding structures, I would look to go to a jeweler, even though it might be for welding structures in the mining industry or something. I could see scope for being able to cross-fertilize and cross-discipline.
Yeah, I mean the most stunning thing that I recollect, and I always quote it, was this collaboration that Roger Kneebone did with Catherine Coleman,
yeah,
where he put her in connected with a consultant surgeon who specialized in things like kidney stones. And they'd got this enormous machine to break a kidney stone in half. And every time he tried to do it, it shattered and it just didn't work. And yet she had a tiny little machine plugged into a 13 amp socket on a table and took layers off with her skill of engraving, and just sort of picked it up and said, well, there you are. And he sat there with his jaw on his kneecaps.
Yeah,
and you know, a multi-million-pound machine which was supposed to break it in half and achieve nothing, and yet she, as a glass engraver and an artist, sat there and applied her mythology and gave him exactly what he wanted.
I mean, that was the reason I worked 2 years in Cincinnati, because the aerospace industry and the turbine industry, those piercings, that methodology they could see could be applied to their industry.
Yes, yeah.
And working on the 5-axis. It didn't work out in the end, but there's huge scope in the UK for that to occur. But I think we've just got very traditional approaches at the moment.
Well, I mean, he also put sort of orthopedic surgeons together with stonemasons.
Well, it's same as like Matt Duran with the growing ears of glass, you know.
Yeah.
You know, so there's scope. I think some of them have medical, when it's medical and there's growth, and because of the surface structure of glass, you can able to grow things from it.
Yes.
The thing with water jet, it's quite a dirty process, you know, it's coarse, it's rough edges. But they've used water jet for liver surgery, they've used it for all sorts of things. They looked at it in dentistry as well. So, you know, even your, you know, one could argue your Karacha spray is a water jet. It's just very low pressure. But if you increase that pressure up, or if you kept that on your hand for long enough, it would cause a lot of damage. So, you know, yeah, I'm just a water jet gal, really.
Must be
can I ask a commercial question? Do you have a market for your beautiful pieces?
There has been a market, but I think because I don't produce a lot of work, I mean, this year I produced those pieces. I'm not very, I would say hand on heart at the moment, I'm not great at selling myself. So I work towards an exhibition to push my boundaries. I suppose I've always said I'm an academic artist. Because I did the PhD, I think I became then a research-driven artist. So I'm always looking at a question to push forward rather than an artist practice to try and make it a career. I did for a while. I think I think there is a market. I don't think I've necessarily found the right one yet, but I have had it. I find a lot of engineers and people who've bought my work in the States have been engineers or people who are interested in processes and that kind of technicality.
Well, I mean,
you know,
quite a lot of what we saw this evening sort of looked like jet engine blades.
Yeah, well, it's that aerospace industry, you know, that's that turbine industry. Yeah. I'm influenced by things around me, so a lot of those forms came from what I saw or what I'm interested in, you know. whether it's looking at inside of a tomato, if it's looking at a jet engine or a, you know, I just, like I said, I love a machine. You know, I'm influenced by this. I'm influenced by stuff that I surround myself. So I'm interested in, like, the printer I've got in front of me. I've got a 3D printer here that's just come from the Czech Republic. There'll probably be some shape on it or some gadget on it that interests me in terms of its form. And that will flow into becoming a shape. I sometimes, when I'm working on this software for the water jet, shapes and forms come about because I'm working on that software. The handwriting came around because I had nothing. I had a pen, you know, and actually it has been great because everybody's handwriting is unique. Everybody's handwriting is different. And what some person said to me is, our handwriting and what we write is the only thing that's going to be kept secret from now on, because everything's digital online, everything can be accessed. So actually what we write with our hand is probably the only thing we can keep secret.
Yeah.
Well, my handwriting is very secret because nobody can read it.
But
me.
But give it to me and I can scan it in and I can replicate it. You know, I can program it and I can keep the structure and I can program your handwriting.
But if I was to write the word love, you probably wouldn't be able to get what it's saying exactly.
But I don't have to understand what it says. It's your handwriting, so it's what you understand. So it's about.
Oh, I don't understand it.
But it's about, you know, when you look in Chitter Chatter, you recognise some people who've given me handwriting, like the engineers. When I said just give me something you've written, they gave me a formula. You know, because they couldn't think of anything. When I talked to the people on the machines and I said, give me something to write, they just wrote the names of their children because you know, I got a shopping list from my old mentor. He gave me kind of the most random thing. And then somebody gave me their shopping list because I said it could be anything. And I quite like that because it's about what people are thinking at the time. You know, it's kind of like the idea of free writing or what's in your mind. And even when I did the scrutiny pieces, which was the first bits with the circular discs, were really kind of me saying two fingers to academia, where we kind of, you know, as artists, we have to make outcomes that are assessed and kind of, you know, a bit like being assessed alongside Professor Kneebone, you know, for REF. You have to have these outcomes. Is it international enough? Is it good enough research? And so these scrutinies I put into, you know, magnifying glasses, the old gooseneck magnifying glasses, so that you could see my handwriting, but it was in a kind of scientific context under the magnifying scope. So, you know, some of the titles come from, you know, I suppose how I'm feeling at the time, but also about they evolve, you know. So chaos is about that containment, and I think also done at a time when my mind wasn't particularly great, and alongside Chitter Chatter, I think, you know, I think we all as artists and designers, we do stuff that is informed by our lives, whether it's in our work life or whatever, but we do it without necessarily realizing we're doing it.
Well, chaos looks just like the COVID.
Yeah, yeah, yes, maybe I thought of that, you know. I
think you thought of it before it came.
Ahead of your time.
I think the thing is, when I started the digital, there was a lot of versions. So I started working with waterjet technology in 1998. You know, I've been working with it over 20 years, and there was a lot of aversion. And when I first did my PhD, when I did, I decided to hold out until 2006 at the Biennale, and then everybody was kind of like, and as somebody said to me, you know, you make academic art that every artists are interested in, and they want to know how you've made it, but nobody necessarily buys it, or, you know. But I've also had pieces that have been really good and they've been smashed in transit and you can't insure it. So, you know, there's a huge risk of things, you know. So for me, my favorite piece is the piercings. But I think the work I've done for Silica Valley is the most advanced and finished pieces I've done so far in my career. So I'm happy.
I mean, the biggest difficulty, and I think this is very true of almost every artist, whether it be painting or glass or whatever substance is being created, is that the thought process and the depth of feeling and the craft and the experience that they are trying to express in whatever way they're material they're doing it, they are not trained to be PR and marketing people. And the successful artists have either had somebody that's picked them up who actually sort of suddenly becomes infatuated with the work, and they're like philanthropists and have promoted them and done it. Or you commercially go out and seek a PR marketing person who actually obviously will take a cut of whatever you do, which is what a lot of the galleries do, where they pick up pieces and they're there from the profit situation. And I mean, it's almost like actors who get agents, and they get signed to the agencies and they take a percentage of whatever they get. And there seems this sort of relationship that if you're going to be an artist, whether, as I say, on the stage or whatever, one's got to find somebody who actually will sell you, because that is not something. I mean, it's the analogy of the pimp and the prostitute, isn't it?
Well, the bad thing is within the glass world is often you have to do all the work first. So
Absolutely.
even with architectural glass, when I'm doing designs architecturally, when I've done public art projects, they want all the ideas even before you're selected. They want actually your proposals and all the work and the drawings, initial ideas before even they select you. So you don't even get paid for that initial. And sometimes that can work. But what you'll have now currently is, you know, in the 2000s, there was some large commissions, you know, with the lottery. And so there was a lot of work around. But now what you have is suddenly those commissions have got smaller and smaller. And so, you know, a 10,000 commission, all the people who used to go for the big ones are going for the small ones. But you can't, they're all based around, you know, everybody goes, wow, a £10,000 commission. Well, actually, it will cost you 9,000 just making the piece. And actually, so there's very little, you know, you're not paying yourself. I think I did one project, it was a £80,000 project, and I took home £1,000 out of it. It took nearly 8 years to sort out. And because of, you know, county councils and people involved in different parties and the costs, and some of it was in kind, you know, and some of it was, but literally 80,000 because they had to fundraise. And at the end of it, Kate and I took home minimal. I think the other one is like going to Silicon Valley. The glass had to be sent. Glass can't be insured in transit as art of works anymore. They won't insure it. So you're kind of sending work that you've spent several £1,000s doing to that. If it gets broken, you've got no comeback. But for me, a lot of people think with the machines, they say, oh, you know, it's every piece of glass that gets cut, even the components are slightly different, even though they're CNC'd. You know, they're near accuracy, but they have taper. But, you know, you're talking £100 to £200 an hour for being on one of those machines.
Yeah.
Could you not set yourself up as a company and have indemnity insurance, which would cover a component?
Yeah, but that's again, but as soon as it becomes glass, and even as artwork, every insurance company won't insure it. I used to be able to, because... Can
you call it something different than an artwork?
Well, you can't really when they see a picture of it, because they'll say that's an artwork. But it used to be you could insure glass because whiskey's insured. Whiskey's insured in transit, and it goes in glass bottles. But you now it's changed. They've got much tighter. But I also
maybe you should design something that has whiskey in it.
Oh, maybe. I think people say to me, you're going to make it into a light, but with sculptures, and I kind of say I could do, but that becomes a lower price thing. That comes, you know, it's the same process. It could come a lot cheaper, but you know, it'll involve. I seem to make some smaller pieces that are very delicate, and I just challenging. But we'll see. I'm looking at it now. I'm in that phase where I'd like to return to being making full time and seeing how I can do it. And when I had the studio years ago, I used to do jewellery for the galleries in London. And so I'm thinking back, you know, and Barbara will remember me buying dichroic glass from her for
by the ton.
Yeah, by the ton. So maybe a little bit dichroic, but I've got loads of offcuts. So you might see another little sideline on another name. But if I could, hand on heart, if somebody could go out and do the selling and just leave me in my studio to get on, I'd be a happy bunny.
Could you not approach maybe large corporate companies, i.e. like Rolls-Royce and Flight, it looked like a turbine. Obviously Rolls-Royce do turbines, and they have many offices and many foyers where they have ornaments and artwork, where in fact
yeah.
a turbine, isn't it?
I think I just need somebody to do it, because I think sometimes when you cold call or you send stuff, sometimes it's
you know, I've introduced you to Joe.
Yeah. So
they're doing stuff.
We spoke, we're arranging. I think the thing is, it's one of those, sometimes they have curators. Some of these companies go through certain consultancy agencies and they go for what they think rather than, you know.
I mean, Joe's doing stuff for Rolls-Royce.
Yeah.
And of course, big yachts.
Yeah.
So, you know,
technically,
the sort of...
Andrew. We can talk, Andrew. You can help me.
we live too far apart.
Good God, you're almost on each other's doorstep. What are you talking about?
I can feel that fringe from here. So, yeah, no. We'll get the Dinlows talking.
I think one of the issues is that curators tend to be too timid and interpret the taste of people. So work like yours, which most people have never seen before, they tend to, and I'm thinking in terms of Broadfield House, where they went for the soft see-through lampshade looking thing against something that was challenging like yours, because they interpreted the taste of the people who were going to see it. And I think curators are a big problem because it's their taste that's being imposed on everybody else.
I think sometimes it's this, your face fits as well. And I'm not a person who networks bigly. I used to, and I used to help, I've helped a lot of artists. And I remember the I Am Fine piece I did for Esther, and some people came up to me and said, I love that piece you did. And I'd find myself going, I only facilitated that. That's another artist's work. You know, I could show you, I nearly put it in tonight, the other artists I've helped work with. And I've worked with artists I've worked with somebody called Chris Wright for about 10 years. And when I didn't have a machine, I've then made sure I went up to Sunderland and I introduced him to the water jet technician up there. But I literally sat on her shoulder so that she could understand the quality that he needed so that he could get the outcome he needed, because I knew I couldn't do it anymore because I didn't have the facilities. So I found the right person to do it. Same as, I don't know how many of you have gone to Chatsworth House and seen the DNA wall.
Yeah.
I initially did all the cutting for that, and because I was at the university and I had to send the work back and then source a supplier for him to get it cut. So I, did that initial cutting for him to get those tiles absolutely accurate.
Were you with us the night we had Julia and Madeline on from the interior designers?
No, yeah. I think I was away.
Right, well, I'll put you in touch with those two, because there's elements of the sort of work that they do, and they actually create furniture, they create concepts within living environments which are slightly retro and slightly innovative and pioneering. And there may be some work there that you could actually sort of work together and sort of create stuff, because they actually commission things to be made.
Yeah.
That work within the sort of work that they do. So I'll set that up. I'll put you together and you can have a conversation, because they are also very vibrant and very positive and full of joy and energy that are so positive. one can almost sort of tap into it like an AA battery. They're great fun.
No, that'd be great.
And they're fellow glass sellers, you know. So
yeah, that'd be great. I think I find sometimes I'm very good with ideas and developing, and I'm good at sort of networking in bits and pieces. But I think the last 5 years, I hit a wall a few years ago, and I kind of the confidence of actually going face to face with people became more and more difficult because I think burnout in academia that took over rather than my practice, and so now I'm trying to claw it back. But I enjoy challenging. I like pushing boundaries, and I think like when I did the Biennale piece last year, people weren't expecting me to do a great big 10-meter long piece with.
It was enormous.
I know, but it was an architectural piece. It played with light. It did everything I do in my practice. It's just for me, the Biennale is to extend your boundaries and produce stuff that is challenging what people think you do. And I don't want to make.
The question to you was, did the Biennale have the right audience to actually appreciate what you'd done?
No, it didn't. But I kind of did it for my own confidence.
You did it for yourself.
I needed to finish a project. I wanted to make it big. I wanted it to be different to my normal stuff, and also say Vanessa is still around.
But where does it go from there? Where does that piece
still pulling a magic in, I suppose.
But where does that piece go? Because it should be like in a city, like a City of London front foyer.
Well, yeah, it does. At the moment, it all fits into one little woven plastic bag, and it's all in a drawer in my studio. So it's waiting to be able to be pulled out and redesigned somewhere else. So I've actually I've looked to use those pins to make maybe like the chaos. I'm looking at maybe making some smaller light pieces that are about 1 meter square that could go in people's.
It'd also be interesting to try networking within the interior design departments.
Yes. It's just another thing on the list that I need to get my head around.
I've got one of those lists as well. I think, Vanessa, I'm stunning. Absolutely amazing. And I think, you know, we've done an hour with non-stop conversation, and I think it's been absolutely inspiring. I know Richard sort of already said he never realised the depths, and I hadn't realised either. And I think we could go on for ages. And Bill, as usual, has a question at the end.
I do, Vanessa. One comment: I was intrigued by the first piece you showed us. It was essentially a square of glass with lots of little holes in.
The dots.
Oh, they're piercings, yeah. So the big square, the frame, yeah.
And you said how difficult it was to stop it spitting the glass. How did you achieve that?
So to achieve it, I had to work with Pilkingtons to find their annealing cycle to make sure there was no stress in the glass at all.
Ah.
So I had to, so when you get a glass that's finished and polished up, I have to put it in the kiln on its edge, because then the surface area is not so great, and I have to take all the stress out of the glass.
Right.
So I have to
before you do the jetting of the holes.
Yeah, and then with the piercings, I have to know this and the amount of seconds and the flow rate for the glass and the abrasive. So for every piercing to a certain depth, I had to know that. So it'd say 5 seconds to get a pierce to that depth.
Right.
So that's 3 days of I had to break it down into, the program was bigger than the machine could take. So I had to break it down into 7 programs, and then machine error. So you had to make sure you got the line count right. And so what I did was I did 3 lines, 3 sections of 5 each day for 3 days.
In a perverse sort of way, it made me think of the comet disaster.
But I love it. And what I've done since then, so when I was able to get onto 5-axis machines, I've done a piece that's in America with the turbine company, which I hope they might send back to me, where I looked at changing the angle on each line by 2 degrees up to its maximum, and seeing, and a bit like methodology, testing how long it takes before it starts to break through the front surface. So I've done another one which actually it starts then going like that. You know, but so as you look at it, it starts coming 3-dimensional. But you know, to be able to do that again, I don't know. That would be sweet talking some company to enable me to have a machine for about a week solid.
But do you know what I meant by the comet disaster?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm sure others do.
But I did like my P1. I tried to make 3 and I made 2 in the end. Right. One was flat and one was at the angle. Yeah. I always try to make 3 pieces and I always end up making 2 because there's usually some, they may look simple pieces, but technically they're very challenging. You know, even the gaps, I try and, you know, the glass thickness is around 2 millimeters in those pieces that I'm cutting out. So I waste a lot of glass and then I just use the tiny, you know, wire frame. So I'm making, I suppose I'm drawing with glass, you know, I'm cutting and keeping it as thin as possible, about 2 millimeters in width, so that you kind of, you know, I've had a number of people think it's 2 bits of glass because you've got the abraded surface on each side, but it's still transparent from the top.
Yeah. Do you polish any of your parts?
I sandblast them and then I kind of satin finish them with toothbrushes.
Right.
If I polish them, they would, I'm fired, you might get some distortion. So I kind of like the mattness and the satin, that kind of finish. But I could dip them, but I think it'd lose their quality because that kind of woven effect with the shadow. So even with that first one, the mechanics, that's clear glass with a layer of white and then clear glass. So I used a billet of glass, 3mm sheet of glass and another billet, put them in a great big, you know, 5 days in the kiln to make a big slab. And then when you started cutting, it's the shadow of the white and it's the transmitted and the translucent, the light that is rebounding, that's making that grey. So it makes the clear look white and it also makes it look different. It doesn't look clear, but it looks like 3 tones of white rather than clear, white, clear. So creating illusions.
Okay, I really do think we could be here for the rest of the night going on.
Sorry.
It's time to call it a night, I think. Yeah. Absolutely fascinating, Vanessa. Amazing, really, really.
Yeah,
and thank you so much.
And any advice, most welcome. So if anyone wants to email me and help guide me, I don't mind.
All right, maybe people have some suggestions and things like that.
Okay.
So we call it a night and say good night. We're going to be Wednesday next week. We're not going to be Thursday. And we're having Emma Goring come on board from Denmark. She was the runner-up to the Biennale last year for the Students' Prize. And she's going to be talking about the work and the things that she's doing in Denmark and what she's also exploring and what she's doing. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. I'm halfway through doing a clerk's missive to you all, trying to sort of make some sense of what today's happenings have been and where we're going to be going, hopefully in the future, and trying to keep a positive, proactive attitude.
You're doing a great job, Paul, in keeping us all half sensible.
Absolutely, here. Yeah.
Just today, the tunnel's got a bit longer yet again. So
yes, it has. Yeah.
We'll say good night to you all and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody. Good night, Vanessa.
Bye, everybody.